Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. And I want to welcome you back to this segment of season 9 that's really focusing on the anniversary of the Justified Anger article, a piece I wrote for the Cap Times in late 2023. No, I'm sorry. I wrote in late 2013. My, how time flies when you're having fun and making trouble. And so I'm wanting to capture memories of what happened 10 years ago, where people were, and the impact of the article about Madison shortchanging and really not serving his black community well. And I want to, I have some exciting guests in the studio today who are going to talk to us about a program and its impact that's called Court Observers. And so we're going to get into this in just a little bit. But what I love about this is after people have taken our U.S. Black History course, and there's a link for this that I'm going to put inside the podcast notes because this is a virtual class as well as an in-person. And so regardless of where you live in the world, no, your time zone might have an impact on this, but no matter where you live in the world, you can participate in this Class Act U.S. Black History for a New Day course that's taught by faculty from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It helps people to understand how systems were built in this country that create the reality of racial disparities. It didn't just happen. There's some thought given to this. So the history talks about it. And as we finish this 9-week course, the participants, the graduates, will often ask, well, what do I do next? What do I do now? Because I've gotten this information. And we say, interesting that you would ask. What do you think you should do? What are your spheres of influence? What's that in your hand? What can you take on yourself? And this Court Observers program is the fruit of that discussion, of those kinds of discussions. And so I've got Sandi Reinardy, who's here in the studio, who helps to head up that program. Then also one of my team members, Aaron Hicks, who works in our reentry program, and he runs our Man Up, our support group for men who are formerly incarcerated. And we're going to talk about what this Court Observers project has meant for the community. And then Aaron's going to help me just offer some commentary on what that means for people coming into court systems. So let me just first ask, Aaron, Sandi, how are you both feeling today?
Man, it's good to be on here. It's a blessing.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. So Sandi, tell me a couple of little things. So a few things. Do you remember when you went through the U.S. Black History course?
I did. I actually did it in 2018.
All right. So you took the course and we did it all in person, and it wasn't all this highfalutin fancy online stuff, which I love. But you had to come out here for 9 weeks.
I did.
On a Monday night. Do you remember how you found out about the course?
I don't actually.
So did you have any friends who went through it, or do you remember if you saw it online?
I must have seen it online
somewhere
and had been looking for stuff. I actually was in the Court Observer program first. I had tried to take the course. I was going to take the course a couple of times, and then...
Oh, and you weren't admitted.
I wasn't admitted. No, I made it.
Sandi failed the race test. We asked her, Miracle Whip or mayonnaise, Tabasco or and she answered incorrectly, so she didn't get in. No, let me shut up. Let me stop Sandi. So you actually participated in the Court Observers program before you took the class.
Yeah. So what happened is I wanted to take the class, and 2 years in a row I would go through the start to register, and then get to the point where it said we'd really like you to be here for all 9, and I knew I had something I couldn't.
Sure.
And then I'd be like, oh, I can't. And then I thought, well, that's silly. Finally, the 3rd year. But because of that, I was on the newsletter, so that's how I found out about the court advocacy program.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's really great. And Aaron, how are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you for asking.
Okay, all right. So we're gonna listen to to some of the stuff that Sandi is saying. So Aaron, You feeling all right?
Yeah,
You kind of quiet today.
I am, because it's just interesting that we're in a space and place where, like, man, things are changing. Life is changing, right? And so
We're getting older. I see some gray in your beard that I
I'm,
didn't see when I first
I'm
met
actually
you.
getting better.
Are you really?
Indeed.
Aaron, how long have you been black?
Yeah. So it all started in 73, actually.
That's when your blackness started?
Yep. That's exactly when it started, right there in 73.
All right. And you stayed the course. You haven't,
I didn't shake it.
you just held on to it and perfected it.
Indeed.
For lo, these 50 years, you have perfected your blackness.
Indeed.
Got you.
But I love our topic, though.
All right.
I love everything that it stands for, because for me, what it does is it opens the eyes of people who may have never known this is how the court system is ran. You hear things, it's a lot of speculation, but to actually have the opportunity to be in those courtrooms, to be able to see individuals having court right through the food hole, you know what I mean? It's almost like touch it, feel it. Now you see, externally they make it look a certain way. You hear it, but when you get inside and behind the curtain, you can totally see how
It changes you.
everything about how you see court, the laws, everything.
So let's just jump right into this. So when friends ask you, Sandi, about this work that you do with court observing or court advocacy, like, what's your elevator speech? So if coworkers say, "Hey, Sandi, I saw you on the news the other day," and you've been on the news because they've covered this story, what do you say to people when they say, "What is this court observer, advocacy program? What is it, and how'd you get connected?"
Yeah, well, so I say part of how we got connected is this amazing organization that opened up room for people to learn more about, white people in particular, to learn more about stuff they didn't know, about what the Black experience is like, and the extent to which, particularly here in Wisconsin, our incarceration, the disparities in incarceration rates are so egregious, with 6% of the population being Black and 50-something% of our people incarcerated in this state are Black. And so it's one of the things I tell them is, we pay a lot of attention. We hear a lot about policing. That gets a lot of media
Sure.
attention. And there's kind of a growing awareness about incarceration and mass incarceration generally. But this part in between, what happens between when you get arrested by the police and when you get sent to prison? And that's this court process that plays out. And so we, as observers, are paying attention, going to see what that is about, what happens in between here, we know that the racial disparities get compounded at each step in the process, and so this is that middle part where it's easy not to pay attention to. It's easy to miss and not to see.
Sure.
So nobody's looking. But it's a public part of our democracy, and all of our democracy should have transparency and eyes on it in order to function. And so that's what we're looking at here.
Sure. And this organization, this wonderful organization that Sandi's referring to, is the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, and its Justified Anger initiative. What was just a front page article that went viral in the city of Madison actually became an initiative, because for 20 years, Nehemiah focused on strengthening the Black community. But after I wrote Justified Anger, we asked, how do we train allies or would-be allies to understand how systems are created so that they can be a part of dismantling it? So this isn't just a field trip, right, Sandi? It's not like people just, let's go see what happens to the Black and brown
Right.
people. It really is about changing individuals who then take some ownership of understanding the issues, but speaking up about them, becoming a part of the solution. And so for you, Sandi, what was the process for this, moving from just, this is a novel idea, this is somewhat experiential, to really being impacted deeply, not only not just with sympathy towards those who were misused by the system inside of it, but the egregiousness of how people are treated so poorly in the community. Tell me about a little of the process that helped you to move from, I feel bad that this is happening, to people to, oh my gosh, this is happening, and our lack of knowledge is what's perpetuating it. Can you talk a little bit about that process for yourself?
Sure. So personally, I had been paying a lot of attention to the incarceration issue, to criminal legal system, issues with the criminal legal system. And again, it was you and prior work that you had done that set us up to be able to further investigate. Because you working with Jerome Dillard had established your criminal justice roundtable,
Right.
whereby one of their local judges had made a comment about people that he thinks he might sentence people differently when there's people in the courtroom supporting that person, when they've got family and friends. And that was the initial kernel of the idea that people who had gone through the course and stuff that was in the next steps process had come up with and had said, okay, can we create this advocacy program? And initially the vision was, can we do that? How do we show support? And I think the initial vision might have been more individual. How do we work with individual people facing charges? But we realized through more connection with, we met with the Man Up group as well as a number of other people in the community. And, they said, well, you don't have relationships with anybody. How can you just walk in and support somebody when you don't have relationships? So it's a really good back to the drawing board moment for us to sink in what we do and don't know.
Wait, can I ask a question? So you all as community folks, potential advocates, but professional folks in our community actually let impacted folks, formerly incarcerated folks, shape your strategies for how you wanted to go about your volunteerism?
We did.
That's good.
I mean, that's what it's supposed to be, but
Yep.
it doesn't always happen that way. It's like, well, nope, this is how we want to do it. No, we don't need relationships. So they told you needed relationships. So what happened from there?
So we started researching and trying to figure out what can we do with the information and the capacity and the relationships that we do have. And we found that there were court observation programs, usually for domestic violence survivors.
Sure.
That had been quite impactful in certain communities. And we decided to just start showing up and seeing if we could do something similar from the perspective of defendants. Could we go and what can we learn and what can we see about this process? And kind of took what we could learn from there and from talking with different community members to just start. Initially, we just started going. And so it was a smaller group in the beginning. And then we had a public defender joined our group, and he was incredibly helpful in helping us understand the process and what we would be looking for. And with his help, we put together a training and offered a training in 2018 for the members of the public, which primarily the Nehemiah community.
Yeah.
And the volunteers put this together. This was not an established. I'm saying this as Nehemiah's CEO and founder. This is not a program that we had established and handed over to you all. You did the research, you did the listening, and took the history and just the knowledge of what the true context of the racial disparity is in our community and country, and acted accordingly, which is my dream. We wanted people to be informed, be inspired, and then ask, all right, what's my role in this? How can I make this happen? Rather than saying, tell us what to do. Just make a list, send me to a website, tell me what to do. Sandi, I really appreciate that. And I think I forgot the part of the story that a public defender joined it, that they saw power in this group. I mean, you're a public defender, but you're finding this. Aaron, I'm gonna bring you in just a moment. But Sandi, do you remember?
This is good.
Do you remember the first time? Well, when you went in to observe, was there initially was there any interaction with the defendant? So, did they know you were in their corner when they came into the courtroom?
No, they did not.
They did not.
We're just sitting there, which I think in some whether the defendant knows or not, that's another question. But in some ways, the fact that we just showed up worked in our favor a little bit. We just kind of started showing up, and after a while, the judges started to say, "Who are these white-haired ladies sitting in the courtroom all the time? They don't look like law students,
And they don't look like family."
Yeah, and because we'd be sitting there for the whole, watching a number of hearings.
So do you remember when the judge first, did the judge actually say, over the bench, "Excuse me, who are you?" Did the judge address you all?
The bailiffs will ask, and then sometimes the judge will say, "Hey, who are you with? What are you doing?" And so after a little while, they did know. They don't ask us anymore, although they'll ask if we have questions. And
I mean, Aaron, this is how you change system. This is how you go and you listen. You don't get in front of the process. You learn the process, because once you understand that the process is flawed, because Aaron, you're the one who says more than anyone, the system's not broken. It's doing what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
But to observe this is just, I don't know, it's amazing. So Sandy, do you remember either an aha moment that you had, or maybe those who worked closely with you or sat with you in these cases, where something just sort of happened and you just said, wait, okay, this isn't just a fluke. It wasn't just like half the time, like, this is real. Like, this is really happening. I'm sitting here and this is really happening. Like, do you remember having moments like that where you just got an aha that this was not make-believe?
Those moments happen all the time. And I'll be honest, a lot of it happens in small pieces. It's not that it is always like super glaring. It's not like, oh, somebody, people aren't calling out a lot of racist words and things like that.
Sure.
So you got to kind of absorb it. But I was in court one day several years ago where there were 2 hearings back to back. One 30-something-year-old black man who had gotten like a 7th DUI or something after many years sober and had run into some tough times, and his kids were involved in the foster care system, and the social worker had testified on his behalf saying he has gotten it together. He has worked so hard. This was a fluke. I'm here saying, please don't send him. Keep his family together.
Right.
Do these things. And the judge still sentenced him to, like, I don't remember how long, a year or something. Immediately followed by a white older gentleman who was
Don't say
on
it, Sandy.
his 8th
Don't you say it.
DUI. There's a little bit of a silver lining here.
Okay, all right.
Which is the 8th DUI. The prosecutor in this case was recommending probation instead. And the judge actually did call out. She said, wait a minute. Are you telling me that one case ago this was the situation, and now this time this is what you're asking?
The judge did call out the prosecutor.
Yep. Which was great to see her do that.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is.
But without it happening back to back, you don't notice it. Right. They don't notice it. We've talked to the judges about that.
That's so curious. That's so interesting. I just have to just let that sink in for a minute, Aaron. Before we bring Aaron in, Sandy, talk to me a little bit about just, do you have any statistics or information that you can share with our listeners just about the impact, the numbers of court cases you've observed? Like what are some of the information that just to give people a sense of the depth and the breadth of the work of this volunteer arm of our organization?
Sure. So since we started, we have trained about 245 people to observe.
Wow.
We got a big bumps in those during the pandemic when all the hearings went online. A lot of people came forward and did the trainings and have participated. And then one thing I'm really excited about is that also includes 10 or 12 people each from Racine County and Outagamie County who are starting their own programs and working with us on that.
Because they were inspired by what you're doing here in Dane County.
Yeah, was on a panel with someone who works with Expo out of Racine County, and he kind of got his group going, and the word has spread a little bit. And so that I'm really excited about getting and expanding and having more people do this in other counties and getting a sense of how things are working across the state.
That's amazing. How many court cases would you say have been observed?
We have observed a little over 11,000 at this point.
That is crazy.
Wow.
11,000 court cases. Wow. And then and like you all don't just sit there and knit during court or eat popcorn. I mean, like, are you making notes? Are you making observations? And does a judge? So yes, you do take notes.
Yep, we have monitoring forms. We have specific information, which have changed over time as we got more. We iterate. So in the beginning, we just grabbed everything we could, and then we look at the data and try to figure out what means anything.
And this is my company. This is my organization. This is what we doing there. So Sandy, talk to me a little bit about like what's on the intake form. Like, does it ask the race of the bailiff, or is any like give me an example of some of the questions that you think people who are listening would be interested in knowing?
Yeah, so we do. So we also, I'll mention that we observe in 2021, we started observing eviction court as well. So we do both criminal
Thank you.
and eviction court observations. with eviction court, the data we're looking at a lot is how many cases reach eviction. Representation is the biggest thing there. How many people, because in eviction court, because it's civil court, people don't have a right to an attorney automatically. So they don't, most people are unrepresented. And so we are able to see in our data how many people, what are the outcomes of how often is something, do people end up with an eviction versus some sort of stipulation where they're able to work out with their landlord and avoid eviction, and how does having an attorney play into that? And our data shows the very few people who get evicted had attorneys. So people still get evicted with attorneys, but when you look at the reverse, when we look at just how many evictions are there, they're teeny tiny number who had attorneys.
Very, very interesting. And so 11,000. Like, did you ever see this day coming? Like, when you sat in on your first, observing your first court case, did you think, okay, in a couple of years we will have looked at 11,000?
No, and when we hit 1,000, it was such a big deal. Like, we threw a little party, and now we're at
Wow. And so you have these forms. And so again, back to some of the interesting information, like data that you collect. So when you're looking at non-eviction cases, does it ask about the gender or the ethnicity of the judge or bailiffs or the defendants?
We don't capture the ethnicity of the judge, in part because there's so few that we know.
Right.
And there have not been, I don't think, there's not been a lot of judges of color in the criminal rotation since we've been doing
So you don't
this.
have to capture that.
Right, but people are paying attention. The bailiffs, again, they're mostly white in the courtrooms. The race thing, I will say, because I think this is interesting. It's been an interesting evolution of how we capture race in our observations, because the form says perceived race. Because we don't always see the person.
Sure.
And it's in CCAP, in our state system for public court records. It's not always accurate, and you don't necessarily have that easily accessible while you're observing court. So we've asked people to do perceived race, which makes them uncomfortable. We've had to deal with this thing, but our theory, which we've worked out with Karen, or our process, which we've worked out with Dr. Karen Reese, is the impact of race in this process comes from whatever the perception is of the people that are making people in power. And
That sounds like Dr. Reese.
we have to get over our own fear of claiming what race we think somebody is based on their voice or their how they talk, whatever it might be. But if we're here, we're hearing the same thing that the judge is hearing. Right. And so that perception, that's been a thing that we've had to wrestle with as a group and become understand what that means and what does it mean to embody that.
Sure. So when you sit in on cases, you're listening, you don't know who you're getting because you're sitting there all day. Of the 11,000, any idea approximately of how many of those folks were just say people of color? I won't have you try to disaggregate the various ethnic groups, but what would you estimate? Is it half of the people whose cases you're observing are people of color, or
Yes.
about half?
Yes, it's more than half, depending on once you do break it down beyond. It's half.
So that's over 5,000 cases involving people of color.
Half are black. So
wait, half of the 11,000 is black?
Half are black, and then another percentage would be Asian, Native American,
on
Hispanic,
top of
that.
So that's also putting a very bright light on who's actually in our court system. That is really, really interesting. So Aaron, let me just shift to you for just a moment. I just want you to take this in, because you're 50 years old. Your profession is about helping people survive the criminal justice system, reenter society, have places where they can talk and have support. But you've also been on the other side where you needed help and services. Going back to probably when you were a teenager, you've talked about that on the show. What does it mean to a person, to a defendant, having to go before a judge, not being able to afford a lawyer, and knowing that there are people out here willing to just watch and be a witness to what may or may not happen inside this. Help people understand what the importance of this kind of work is to people who already feel defeated going into a court.
Yeah, it's a game changer, actually. Man, it's so huge because, first and foremost, when you're in there, you are clueless. You don't even understand absolutely nothing that's taking place.
When you're in there, you mean
That's
incarcerated?
Right. That's right. And I don't know, if you only did adults or juveniles. Did you do any juvenile?
We're not allowed. Those ones are restricted.
Okay.
Yeah.
But me experiencing both from the juvenile and from the adult, like kids, one thing about kids, and people are smart. They don't always know how to articulate something is going on, something's not right, but people are smart because they understand that something is not right. And I think with this opportunity for, individuals being able to go into the courtroom and actually observe and see and hear, and taste it and feel it, you start to see like, okay, now you start to understand something is clearly not right. There's no way in God's green earth that the state of Wisconsin makes up 7% around the whole state. And
Of black people?
Of people of color, black people. And you look at these courtrooms and you look at these prisons and like this is not a oops, this is not any of those things. And we try to say that it's broken, but it's clearly not broken because this exists from state to state. You still see the same principle in every aspect of life. You can see the intentionality behind it. And I remember being in a meeting and they were in the process of trying to come up with a diversion program. And they were like, well, the issue is, how do we, every time we come up with a diversion program, the people of color get missed out in it. And so they were posing a question of how do you stop that? And I just gave them something real simple. You do it with intentionality. The same way you lock us up is the same way you set us free. Intentionally.
Be intentional about it.
That's right.
So you think about some of the men you work with who come to your weekly Man Up groups where they're looking to be heard, to be seen, to share information. But they can walk into a court knowing that they are people who are not paid by the courts.
Yeah.
So they're not fearful of the courts.
Yeah.
Who by their own presence is holding the court and judges and DAs accountable because someone is making, taking notes. Like Sandy mentioned a little bit ago that the judge challenged the prosecutor by saying, wait a minute, you just recommended something completely different for another kid.
Right.
But the court, the observers noticed that as well. So the judge wasn't the only one seeing that, but the judge saw it knowing that other people saw the judge seeing it. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about the importance of just introducing accountability from a civilian standpoint into the courts, and what does that mean for folks just knowing
I just think
11,000 cases that we can document?
Huge. That's so huge. Every aspect of that is huge. The one thing that I would throw in there, like when you because you said you do like an intake or something, a form of some kind. So I'll give you an example. They did. I don't know if you heard any of the conversations around bail. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what's interesting about bail is it's designed for people to be able to get bailed out. So when I posed the question, so how do we get to where we are right now? Because now bail is operated off of fear. If the public feels, then the bail is up high, all these different factors. But that's not law. And so I would just say, in understanding law, making them still, I don't care if it's fear, I don't care if it's the media. If this is the law, then we have to stay. And so this being an observer, again, it pushes back on them having to use the law. We can't use no other standard, not your personal opinion, not how you feel, not because that's your brother and, he's not. No, this is what the law says. And this is what we should be doing. Whether when you look at bail, whether it's a murder, whatever it is, it's still designed for the individual to get out. That's what bail was set for. That's what we put it in play for, from the legal standpoint. So if a person is not able to, we have an issue.
Not able to what?
To not bail out, not be able to get,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Within the means of that individual, what they can, not putting it at an astronomical number. So I can't come up with $1 million,
Right.
1.5 million before I can get out. That's
crazy.
That's right. And so having observers there to see it and to understand law and to understand, hold on, like, that's not right. You know what I mean? Or to see two individuals, same situation, different colors, and start to see, hold on, what is going on? Why are we doing that? Calling it out. So I just think, in every aspect of that, it's so huge. It's so huge. It's so important to this community, Dane County as a whole, and to our community as well, man, in a very real way.
Do the courts ever ask you for the data?
Do they ask us for it? No. They will. Some people will.
Have they hinted that they'd like to know it or see it? Not just the data of what you collected that day, but just
Yeah.
wow, there's 11,000 cases. Like, if I worked for the courts, I'd want to see that data, because they don't. Other than the courts themselves, am I safe in saying no other entity in our community has this kind of data on court proceedings or court cases?
So the thing about it is in the way that the actual individual hearings play out, no, there's no other entity. There's case data that people have access to. Like the Tenant Resource Center has a more complete set of eviction stuff because they see it. Even if it doesn't make it to a hearing, they have that data, stuff like that.
But they pull that from court records. They don't necessarily, like, you're creating the data.
Right.
Or curating it.
Right.
You're not merely just going in, you're collecting it so that others can look at the data you've collected. You're not going in looking at court cases.
Yep.
You're creating court case, or you're recording court cases or observations of the court.
I'll say
court
that
cases.
Some judges have been very open to, talking with us and hearing. Sometimes, it feels super authentic. You know that they're interested and they mean it and they want to know. They're interested in what we're doing and what we're seeing. Others, it feels a little bit more curious out of protective or defensiveness.
Sure. Sure.
And so there's a range, and I think they read. I think they pay attention if we send something.
I bet they do. Now in our 9th season, our award-winning podcast has a reach throughout the United States of America and over 80 countries around the world. Just want to give a quick shout out to my dedicated team of people who are helping me to change the conversations around race. Now, when you support Black Like Me podcast, you are supporting the work that they are doing to help me in creating better quality content, better marketing strategies, bigger and better production, a better interactive experience, but more importantly, a better society through the impact and the work of people who listen to this podcast. You can just click the link below to see the various levels of support that we offer and decide what works for you. Now, those of you who become patrons of this podcast, you'll have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, video chats with me. You'll also have a chance to join conversations with me via Zoom with other people around the country about the subject of race. To become a patron, again, all you've got to do is click the link below and you can support these important conversations and the work that this podcast is doing. I want to thank you in advance. If you had a magic wand, Sandi, or you're able to sit with your court observers with all of your data curated and sorted, what are one or two things you'd want to mandate for judges? Then we'll ask you that same thing for prosecutors. Well,
yeah, the number one thing, and this would go for all court personnel, would be, and we've actually talked about, is this something we could do? And so maybe it is at some point. Training on jargon, training on how to take the time to explain things in clear language.
Because people get confused if they...
Absolutely. The level of legal jargon and legal, some of which is necessary. There are some things that they have to say a certain way,
Sure.
according to, to make everything statutory correct, legally correct. But the amount of jargon and things that are hard to understand, it's the number one observation for new observers when they come in is, I didn't understand a thing they said. Mm-hmm. And the point there that we always recognize is that if we can't understand it and we're walking in there, we're having some coffee and watching it's not our lives that are on the line,
right.
And we can't understand it. So if you're walking in there under stress of it being your situation in your life, then how are you supposed to understand and capture? It goes so fast and it's so difficult to understand. So the number one would be
jargon,
just slowing down in some cases, and being able to just explain, use regular words after you use the legal. If you have to use the legal words, fine, but then just take a second to also say it again.
Sure.
In a way that makes sure everybody understands what's happening.
Sure. And what would be the second thing you'd mandate for judges?
Some sort of exposure to understanding people's lives, and particularly what it's like to be in poverty. And what it's like to live. I mean, you don't even have to be in poverty, just different from the lifestyle that they're generally used to.
Right.
When you talked about, you mentioned like who can afford 1.5 million bail. One of the videos that we have in our training, and it's not for this purpose, it's just one that we happen to have. The public defender was saying, the prosecutor wants bail of 500. The most he can do is 200. And the commissioner says, well, I don't know that there's that much difference between 200 and 500, but we'll go with 3. And most of our observers think, well, yeah, for some people that's an enormous, $300 is an enormous difference. Different things like that. There was a eviction court, an effort this summer to modify a process around which people apply to have their eviction records taken off CCAP, particularly if they've been dismissed, if the eviction was dismissed. And there was a proposed rule circulating among the judges that would include having to have an affidavit notarized. And this isn't common for a lot of other similar types of procedures. And so we met with several judges and we're explaining, like, getting something notarized is not easy, and it's not always free. And they would say, well, it's free at the courthouse. They can just come here. Well, the Dane County Courthouse might be one of the more difficult places
of course.
in the county to get to. By the time you park and where it is and to do all of this stuff, that's time off work. You have to have transportation, all of those things. And so just the chasm between the understanding that they have from their lives and the lives of what people are experiencing, that's the second thing I would change if I had a magic wand.
And would that wand demand the same thing of prosecutors? Would you have the same the same mandates if you had the power to mandate something?
Yeah. I'm going to get a little wonky here, if that's all right.
Please.
With prosecutors, so the thing about our system that's really, one of the things that's really difficult is that there's this like law and punishment. There are laws, and if you break the law, you get punished and you get caught, and you don't have enough money to get your way out. You get punished, and there's a punishment that's prescribed that's pretty much the same regardless of whatever law you broke, which is incarceration or probation or whatever, some sort of incarceration and loss of freedom. But what's happening is there's also, on the other side of this is harm and accountability. So people cause harm in some way. Being punished doesn't help accountability. The punishment in and of itself doesn't help them if there's something they need to change in their lives, if there's resources that they need, if there's some kind of thing that they need to shift or be rehabilitated. Punishment doesn't do that.
Interesting.
And so our legal system is set up for law and punishment. And there's this third part in here that harm happens to victims. And prosecutors, they represent the state, not the victims. They represent the community as a whole, and they're there to sort of enforce the system of law and punishment. But so often, to your point earlier about sense of safety, and that they respond to what people fear about bail and other things, they see themselves as representing the victims, and it's not really their job.
That's interesting.
The problem is that we don't have a good mechanism for helping victims be. So I'm not trying to dismiss their concerns in any way, but we don't.
I like that perspective.
Yeah, we don't have a great mechanism, and so it sort of falls on the prosecutors. And then sometimes we lose sight of the bigger picture here of what are we trying to go for and what is going to be most helpful for the whole community in terms of someone who's caused some harm. Mm-hmm. How do we make everybody whole?
Sandy, one of the definitions, thank you for that. One of the definitions for systemic discrimination is that an individual doesn't have to necessarily have the intention of being evil, but the rules, their processes, hence a system in place that almost creates that mindset or that space. Do you believe that that's true? Have you seen signs that this is not just about bad people acting badly, but it's about a corrupt system that makes it harder for good-intentioned people to do good, or makes it easier for uninformed, ill-informed people to be a part of the problem? Does that question make sense? Like, are you seeing systemic realities do you see where it's creating the problem that we're trying to fix?
Absolutely. I mean, we see issues of, poverty all the time. That's a systemic issue. We see poor, inadequate services. Some people will argue about this, but inadequate services for mental health and substance use. Where people fall into these things for any number of reasons that can also be systemic. They can be, mental health and substance use are really complicated. There's a number of things. But systemically, we don't, we have a culture that is so individualistic and says, you did this, you fix it. And that certainly doesn't help, people come out of that. That's not designed, yeah.
Aaron, one of the things that Sandy alluded to earlier was that there was a statement made that if there are people in the court sitting with people's cases are being tried, that level of accountability can help them. But you also argued with the judge years ago, and we've had you on the show talking about this. You don't have to necessarily rehearse that relationship in its entirety, but you challenged the judge. What percentage of the people that you're sentencing are black? And it was large. How many black people do you know? None. And then you had a chance to build this relationship over the years. What impact would judges knowing people who are poor, judges knowing people who are black, brown, who are from racialized, minoritized communities, what impact do you think that makes on judges' rulings when they're able to see individuals as more human because they've had a chance to interact with them?
I think, again, that's a game changer because it gives them an insight that they would have never had the opportunity to see. It opens their eyes in ways that you could never imagine. And I'll give you something that very specific in my own life, and specifically with this judge. While I was on supervision, I wound up having to go to Dane County Jail, and I sat in there for probably about a month, a little bit over a month, and got back out. And I had a job. I was working for a company while I was still working at Nehemiah. And one of the guys who helped me get the job told me I could come back to that job, but I would have to pay him $150 out of every paycheck. And so I wanted the job, so I did it. In the midst.
Wait, this was an employee that said this to you, or
this is an employee, a person that helped hire me to get into the job.
And he would get you back into it if you paid him.
I had to pay him $150.
That's extortion. Okay.
But when you're on supervision, you understand that all he has to do is just make a phone call, make any allegation, and I'm going to jail. So I was like, I just wanted my job back, really, is all. I needed the money or whatever the case may be. In the midst, I'm sharing everything that I'm sharing with you on the podcast, I'm sharing it with the judge. His knee-jerk response is, you want me to do something about it? And I said, absolutely not. I just wanted you to have the opportunity to see how vulnerable a person is when they're on supervision and when you give them these lengthy supervision or extended supervision sentences, because I was on paper for 7 years. So having to live like that, knowing that he had never saw that. He never saw any situation like that.
And he believed you when you said it.
He knew it. I was showing him everything that I had to do. I was letting him hear the conversations, the text message, every single thing. He was able to, see that this is clearly happening for real. But my agenda was not about getting this individual, you know what I mean? I really wanted him to have the opportunity to see this is what it's like for individuals that's on supervision.
That was wise, Aaron, because even though what was happening to you was illegal, he could have walked away thinking, "Oh, that's the only reason why he reached out to me. Or that's the only reason why he wanted to establish a friendship." And if it's the same judge, we're talking about? He's made a statement publicly saying that in his years of knowing you, you have never, ever leveraged your friendship to ask him to intervene in your personal case or cases of people you knew ever. And so you maintain that perfect record, because that would have ruined that. Not that it would have been wrong, because anybody else, it's called networking. I mean, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But for him to see it, and then for you not to demand that he change it, for him to know that you are still going to work, although you were being blackmailed or extorted or something that I'm sure they could have been written up on.
Easy.
Changed his perspective of not only you, but what folks like you have to go through just to stay legal, just to stay clean, and just to stay out. And then they have to still appear in his court.
That's right. And those are things that, building those type of relationships, having court observers, all of those things are key because they just sit in that position. They understand the legal aspects of what the law says, but they're not seeing the outcomes. They're not seeing what's happening to those individuals. And most of the time, in all honesty, they're not really caring either, right? It's just, and so for all of those reasons, this is why these things are so important. Like, it's critical. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so critical. When I still can turn on, the internet or look at certain things and still see individual just coming home after 20, 30 years, just finding out they didn't even commit the crime at all. Still seeing this type of stuff.
Wow.
So this is why, I believe wholeheartedly in my heart of hearts, if it's doable, which I believe all things is possible, this needs to be a model in all courtrooms. Right. I do believe that.
Right. Now, Sandi, it's interesting as you are waving your wand around about making changes. And again, it doesn't mean that this isn't part of that plan. I just asked you for your top two. Would having more black judges, more black prosecutors, more black bailiffs, would more people of color in the court system change things from the data that you look at?
From the data I look at, I don't think that I could necessarily say. I'm sure that it would.
Sure.
Like, I'm sure that it would. And the system is big and difficult and
interesting.
Hard. Like, of course it would, but it would also be challenging to get there. It would be hard to be the people. I mean, there are certainly black judges and black prosecutors. It's not like there's none. And that perspective would be very valuable and important. But to be honest with you, I guess I don't feel super qualified to answer that particular question. Mm-hmm. The question I feel more qualified to answer is that more awareness in some place like Wisconsin, where our population is disparate, where we've got such a small population of black people in general. The thing that's going to shift, if I can wave more wands, it's expanding the awareness of white people. It's expanding. Mm-hmm. It's expanding that understanding of what is it that our people that aren't exposed to the system are content to let the system go on as it is.
Right.
And they believe that their safety depends on it. And I don't think that's true. Like, all of our safety depends on a better system than the one we have.
Absolutely.
Because the system is not necessarily very rehabilitative. It's not effective at that. And so the thing I think really has to happen, and why I'm excited about trying to expand this to other counties and things, is that we need the general public to become more aware of what their safety is costing the community as a whole, Black communities in particular, and how to mount that political pressure to say, we don't need tough on crime. There's other ways that we can do this.
Aaron,
I just want to speak to that because that's a powerful question. And the only part I just want to speak to is when you ask that question, would it change it? To some degree, yes.
By having Black people, or more people
but overall, absolutely not.
because of the system.
Because the system is designed to do. See it. So the same person, we having a conversation. He said, "I never took on this position to lock up people of color," and I said, "I believe you wholeheartedly. I believe that." And I was like, but if that was the case, because we can just take him out of the equation, put someone else in there, and it changes the narrative. But that's not the case. The system is designed, I don't care what color you are. You could be Asian. You could be any color you put in there, black, white, or anything you put in there, they will be locking up people of color. Why would they be locking up people of color? Because the system was designed for that. That's what it was designed to do. And it will continue to keep doing that. It don't matter who you put in play. It don't matter because that's what it's designed to do. And you see it in every aspect of life. Whether you're in the academic world, whether you're in the entertainment, whether you're in finances, you're going to see the same principle. It continues to keep flowing. You're going to see people of color behind the 8 ball and everybody else in front of it.
So how do we redesign that then? What's the process of redesigning it? Because you said it was designed to do that, but we're in this line of work because we believe in change. So what does redesign look like?
So that design, that's a great question. It's called dismantling, changing everything because how it is.
Clean slate.
Clean slate. It has to be because if not, it will still creep back in there. It's almost like you have to have I don't know what that's called, when all the nations come together and sit down at a table.
A summit or something?
Something like that. That's exactly what would have to happen. And we'd have to sit down and do, because without doing it that way, because basically what you see is people of color, their voices was really stripped out of any decision making in there, right? To be able to cover us, our people, how, you know what I mean, our culture, any of that stuff. All of that was literally like died. So we would have to have that opportunity to have just as much say at the table as everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Man, I mean, you all are bringing up some very interesting points of view, because this is what we do on the grassroots level. We're training people. We're having an impact on systems. But Sandi, to your point, it's not just a matter of bringing more Black people or people of color into the system. You have to expand the minds and touch the hearts of those in the majority culture, the dominant culture, to think differently and to have a different approach in their work. And that reflects the work of Nehemiah also, where we're training non-Black allies, but we're also developing emerging Black leaders, where we're trying to help to infuse, two groups of folks into the system, because one can't fix it by themselves.
That's right.
Sandi, I'm curious, in the training, does anyone say, all right, you might be here because you're good-willed and you want to help do good for people, but unless you're changed, you're not really helpful? Like, are people in the training, are they being told up front, for this to really work, you're going to have to be changed, and this is what it looks like? I'm just curious if someone talks about how they need to be, how they'll be transformed in the process of, of being, altruistic or giving with their times. Is that a stated expectation that you're not just rescuing people, but you're going to be changed and touched?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's become clear to us as we've done this is that possibly the biggest impact we've had is how volunteers are changing.
Interesting.
That it's a little bit harder to get. We're working on it. We work on building relationships in the community and trying to influence, change in the process. But having people shift, recognizing their own, that they do have power to do certain things, and understanding their privilege and where to use it and where to not use it. We do talk about this thing where we ask people that what is part of the training to be watching, to be observing with a stance of curiosity, not judgment. And we tell them there are 3 things that they are doing at the same time. One is external observation, just looking at what's happening in the court, what's the process, what's going on. External analysis, which is why is the system set up this way? Not just what's happening, but what priorities seem to be most important, what's going on here, what goals are being met for a community and what goals are not being met. And then the third part, which we tell people is equally, if not more important than the other, is internal observation about what things are striking me as fair or unfair and why. Where am I? How do I get to that conclusion? What assumptions am I making about people in the courtroom? And when you show up thinking that you're showing up to be because you want to be a good anti-racist, whatever, and then you walk in and you see people that have done some bad things, that people have caused real harm, and then you start to get squirmy about it and like, oh, what am I? And so you have to be open to sitting with that and opening, asking the wider question and examining your own approach. And then also, who do I identify most with in the courtroom?
Wow.
This has been a big one. It's been a big one for me personally, is noticing where are my blind spots, because I have a background in doing some business process work, how to make things efficient and stuff like that. And there's things that happen in the courtroom, and immediately my brain goes to, oh, they probably did that because this and this has to happen, and the judge is worried about that, and the clerk has all these responsibilities. So I go through the whole thing, and before I know it, in 30 seconds, I've rationalized the whole thing away.
Wow, it's
and
okay.
so I have to catch that and say, wait, but why is that all happening? And do that over again, that internal observation over again. So we do ask that of people when they in their trainings.
Sure. And then, is there any follow up after the training when you're debriefing from court cases, observing them? Not necessarily each one, but maybe, I don't know, quarterly. Do you ever go back over that list with people and say, all right, has the person or entity that you most identify with changed? We do
try to get together at least quarterly. We don't always make it, sometimes monthly, and give people room to process and talk through things. And I'd like to do even more of that, kind of posing those questions more directly.
Sure.
But it does come up through the course of things. And as observers, people go further in this, they learn to coach and process and have those questions with each other.
Sure,
so that's been
because I'm thinking about your point about the real change happens when white people begin to think about things differently, and posing those questions to them more regularly helps you to also chart the efficacy of the process. Or if people aren't growing, it helps you to ask why or challenge them a little bit more. 'Cause I just think it's just such an interesting process. We have great data on the courts, but I think I would just suggest capturing some of that data shows the impact of that kind of change. And do folks who are formerly incarcerated, or folks like you, Aaron, are they ever connected or involved in the training or any of the quarterly stuff? Because that would be a great partnership to have people who are also part of the organization to say, that's why this is really helpful. Or does that happen? Does Aaron get up with any of the training someone?
Yeah, it hasn't happened a lot yet, but we'd love for that to happen.
Yeah,
people would love it. I try to be sensitive about not expecting people to come out and whatever, but we would love that partnership.
Yeah, definitely.
But because our organization is about leadership development, for you to have progressed so far in your own recovery, growth, and your development, Mr. Hicks, that you're helping to somehow pour into future or current court observers and their own transformation, I think could be very meaningful. That's why I give the 10-minute, 15 spiel before the history lecture. Because I want people to begin to think differently about what they're going to hear from someone they trust. Yeah. And Sandi's trusted in those circles. If she brings you in as a colleague who's been working with us for so long and have served so many folks, and to help process or offer some of the training makes it somewhat full circle. So I would really suggest that you find some ways to
love it.
To do that, because that's something that you can't do for the men in your group at your group, but you can do it for the men of your group by working with court observers.
That's right.
And I'd like to just pop in on some of those also.
Great.
just to help, because this is extraordinary. The number of cases, the information.
Yeah.
Sandy, I'm going to ask you one more wand question, and then we're going to probably if you could wave a wand over me, who would you want me to coordinate? Like, whose presence would you want me to mandate or to use the public to sort of influence them to show up? Who would you want to be exposed to the data and a conversation with some of your key court observers?
That's a really good question.
Is it the DA? Is it
love
Georges?
I love it.
Judges? Who do I need to get in the room and force them to listen to this information and have a conversation?
You know, I don't know if this is a fair answer or not, but probably like a group of people. I think to Aaron's point earlier, having people come together
So like a
to
summit?
talk through. Yeah.
So throw
like
out some titles so that I want to listeners.
Certainly some of the judges.
Okay.
The sheriff. You know, our work that we've done on the jail stuff. We did this.
I like
we
that idea of calling
convened
the summit.
a group of people to talk about the jail situation with people appearing before food slots, and we had a group of people, and it was very informative and useful for all of us to learn.
Sure.
So, judges,
Gotcha.
the sheriff, the DA.
Business people?
I don't know. I'll think about that.
I want you to think about it, because as we're rolling out our data, this is where I've got to use my position as a highly visible and vocal influencer who's Black, to invite people to this summit and table and make it such that it would be unwise to turn down the invitation. It would be inopportune to turn that down. And let's move
like
towards that. Yes.
I like it a lot.
And let's keep talking, because also this is a kind of question that I love to take back to the group. There's such a good hive mind, the
Yes,
observers in the
yes.
group, to get that feedback on what do you think would be most valuable.
And then I think let's make a lunch or a breakfast. Let's invite those folks. Let's invite them very publicly. They have constituents. They have followers. We can set it up to have a very meaningful, thoughtful conversation around real data. And in a community like Madison that's built around the University of Wisconsin, for folks to not want to look at data and have a discussion about how we can improve systems, and this is free information, I think it would be unwise to not engage. And so,
I love it.
all right, that's our assignment. Well, listen, you all, I don't mean to create more work for folks when they come in to be my guests, but our work is really to make a stronger Madison for everyone.
Yes.
And so there are things that you can do, Mr. Hicks, and things that you can do, Sandy, and things that I can do where we have influence. And I think this is how we bring about true systemic change.
Yes.
You know, you have access to men who are formerly incarcerated. Sandy has access to people that want to learn, lean in, and be part of the problem of not just observing, but dismantling. I love that
Yes.
word that you said.
Yes.
But that dismantling happens many times in a summit setting. And so that's my influence. I'm not running a men's group. I'm not observing court, but I have the platform, the pulpit, if you will, to invite people to come and sit with us.
Yes.
And then you invite, you get people to
Yes.
come so that it makes it, wow, we have the lieutenant governor, we have this person, we have that person, we have the chancellor, or
Yeah, I love it.
we have these folks to come in and have these discussions. We love having those kinds of discussions, but this is data that's held within a Black organization. We get to set the table
Yes.
and the discussion, and we need to make that happen. So, listen, listeners, I'm going to let you go so we can finish this meeting, and so we can further work together in making these things happen. Listen, my special guests today have been Sandi Reinardy and Aaron Hicks, and we've been talking about the impact of the court observers, of the court advocacy program. And again, Sandy, I appreciate the steps that you all have taken, because initially we wanted people to go in and advocate, like meet with the family, get the details, and maybe we will get there. We're now bringing in eviction cases, which I love.
Yes.
I want the group to move towards expulsion. Our kids being expelled from school. I just, I don't care what it is. I've heard that if it's social security cases, no matter what it is, particularly for the poor and for marginalized folks, if people are sitting with them in meetings, it makes a difference. That you're just having people sit there. And this is a wonderful way to use folks, use their talents and their ability in time to make a change. So listen, people, we create this great content so that You lean in and you listen and you begin to think about what this looks like in your community. We don't want you to be a mere voyeur. We don't want you just listening in to us and then doing nothing. This isn't entertainment. This is a call to action. So what can you do? What do you know? What can you influence? And so we want you to share this with folks. You may know DAs and judges. You may be DAs and judges or know lawyers. Send this information to folks and ask, what would this look like in Columbia County? What would this look like in Grant County? What would this look like in Greene County? How can we go and learn from these folks in Dane County? So do that so that you can become a part of the change that you want to see. You can also share this information. You can repost it on your social media. You can write a comment. You can write a comment or evaluate how you're enjoying this podcast. You can click on the link to become a part of our supporters. You can become one of our patrons through our Patreon link. But you can do some things to be a part of helping us to bring change to society. So listen, I want you to have a great day. I want to thank you for being listeners because that is the best part of our podcast. And continue to understand that together we can bring about great change in our community. Have a great day, and thank you for being a part of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G.
Black like me. Black like me.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. You know, when I first imagined doing this podcast, I thought about myself with my iPhone sitting in a room in my house, just sort of doing this all on my own. But you know what? The reason why we've won awards and the reason why we have over 200 episodes up is because I have a brilliant team who helps me to make this podcast what it is. So let me take a moment and thank Jeremy and Eli, who are my editors and producers extraordinaire, Jakisha, who handles marketing. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.
Black like me.